Привет! Меня зовут Happy, and I'd like to welcome you to my history reaction channel. This is the final episode of our 5-part history of Russia, from Rurik to Revolution by Epic History TV. As always, I will have a link to the previous parts in the description below, as well as to the original video that this is being pulled off of. Please head over to Epic History TV, show them some love and support. We want to encourage them to keep making these videos for us. With all that said, last time we left off with the beginning of the reign of Nicholas II. He is the final Tsar of the Romanov dynasty, and he's going to oversee the end of the Russian Empire, and his fall will lead to the beginning of the Soviet Union. So let's get through this and just see how this finishes up.
China granted Russia the right to build a naval base at Port Arthur.
Yeah, they granted them the right because Russia kind of forced them into it. It's not like they were just being magnanimous there. This is going to lead into a war with Japan.
When China faced a major revolt, known as the Boxer Rebellion, Russia moved troops into Manchuria under the pretext of defending Port Arthur from the rebels. This brought Russia into conflict with Japan, who also had designs over Manchuria and Korea.
Yep.
The Japanese made a surprise attack on Port Arthur, then defeated the Russian army at the giant Battle of Mukden.
Yes, they did.
Russia's Baltic fleet, meanwhile, had sailed halfway around the world to reach the Pacific, where it was immediately annihilated at the Battle of Tsushima.
Yeah, so that's 1905. Humiliating defeat for the Russians. I have already done a video, the Blue Jays' dumbest Russian voyage that nobody talks about. I highly recommend watching that. It is hilarious for all the wrong reasons, because it's hilarious because it's true. I feel bad for the serfs that were made up a big portion of this voyage and this battle, because they had no idea what they were doing. They were poorly trained. They just get annihilated by the Japanese in the Battle of Tsushima. It's not even close. It's like 153 Japanese casualties versus like 5,000 Russian casualties, and I'm talking wounded and dead. Russia lost a vast majority of its fleet. Japan, I think, lost 3 ships. It wasn't even close. It is one of the most embarrassing defeats Russia's ever suffered. It's just utterly humiliating. It's going to lead, in part, to a revolution in 1905 in Russia against Tsar Nicholas, because people are already upset. Those same secret societies that killed his grandfather, Alexander II, they're still there. They're still agitating for revolution. They're going to see this as an opportunity because Russia has been humiliated on the national stage. Tsar Nicholas appears weak. Perfect time to strike. It doesn't succeed, but we'll get into that, I'm sure.
Russia was left with no option but to sign a humiliating peace, brokered by US President Theodore Roosevelt.
Yep, won a Nobel Peace Prize for it.
Meanwhile, the Tsar faced another crisis much closer to home.
1905
In St.
revolution.
Petersburg, a strike by steelworkers had escalated, and plans were made for a mass demonstration. Tens of thousands of protesters marched to the Winter Palace to present a petition to the Tsar, asking for better workers' rights and more political freedom.
Yeah, this was led by a priest, and this was actually the way things were supposed to be done in Russia. You were supposed to petition the Tsar with your grievances, and then he would judge. But things are about to go horribly wrong in this case.
But instead, troops opened fire on the crowds, killing more than 100.
Yeah, the Tsar Nicholas was not present at the time, so his troops had to deal with the situation themselves without leadership, and it leads to a disaster.
Bloody Sunday, as it became known, led to more strikes and unrest across the country. The crew of the battleship Potemkin mutinied, killing their officers and taking control of the ship. To defuse the crisis, Nicholas II reluctantly issued the October Manifesto, drafted under the supervision of Sergei Witte. It promised an elected assembly and new political rights, including freedom of speech, and was welcomed by most moderates.
Yeah. Except it never really gets upheld.
Russia's first constitution was drafted the next year. For the first time, the Tsar would share power with an elected assembly, the State Duma, though the Tsar had the right to veto its legislation and dissolve it at any time.
Which basically makes it ineffective.
Sergei Witte finally lost the Tsar's confidence and was dismissed. The Tsar's new Prime Minister, Stolypin, introduced land reforms to help the peasants, while dealing severely with Russia's would-be revolutionaries, so much so that the hangman's noose got a new nickname,
Stolypin's necktie.
Stolypin's necktie. But having survived several attempts on his life, Stolypin was shot and killed by an assassin at the Kiev Opera House. Meanwhile, Grigory Rasputin, a Siberian faith healer, had joined the imperial family's inner circle, thanks to his unique ability to ease the suffering of the Tsar's hemophiliac son, Alexei.
Yeah, due to extensive inbreeding, probably a lot of the royal families in Europe were prone to diseases like hemophilia. There was a lot of intermarriages. Nicholas is, I think, the grandson of Queen Victoria, for example. I believe his wife was also a descendant of Queen Victoria. But anyway, there's so much inbreeding that this isn't unusual. Alexei had hemophilia, that's the bleeding disease. Any cut or scrape could prove fatal because his blood won't clot, he'll bleed to death. Rasputin apparently was able to control this. Modern scholars think it might very well be just because he took Alexei off of aspirin, which is a blood thinner, which probably would have helped.
Despite sporadic acts of terrorism, Russia now had the fastest growing economy in Europe. Agricultural and industrial output were on the rise.
Yeah, but they were also starting out from way behind, so good stuff, but they got a long way to go to catch up.
Most ordinary Russians remained loyal to the Tsar and his family. Russia's future seemed bright.
And then this happened.
In 1914, in Sarajevo, a Slav nationalist assassinated Archduke Franz Ferdinand, heir to the Austro-Hungarian throne, sparking a European crisis.
The July crisis, yep.
When Austria-Hungary declared war on Serbia, Emperor Nicholas ordered the Russian army to mobilize, to show his support for a fellow Slav nation.
Yeah, I mentioned this before. Russia saw themselves as the defenders of the countries that were once, they had kind of unintentionally liberated from the Ottomans. By unintentionally, I mean they kind of conquered the territory, took it from the Ottomans, and Europe said back off, so they backed off and gave them independence. So yeah, now they see themselves in a big brother role. They're not going to back down. They're going to support Serbia, which is going to drag France into the war, which is going to, it's just a chain of dominoes. Yeah, so much going on here.
Austria-Hungary's ally, Germany, saw Russian mobilization as a threat and declared war.
Now, to be fair, Germany had already promised Austro-Hungarian Empire that if they declared war on Serbia, Germany would support them. So it's not like the Russians were the only reason that they entered the war. They'd already promised to have Austro-Hungarian having the back of the empire there. And the demands that the Austro-Hungarian Empire sent to Serbia after the assassination, there were 10 of them, they were designed with the full intention and knowledge that Serbia could not accept all of them. It was just basically a pretext for war. This was all basically staged at this point.
Europe's network of alliances came into effect, and soon all the major powers were marching to war.
Yep.
World War I had begun. Russia experienced a wave of patriotic fervor. The capital, St. Petersburg, was even renamed Petrograd to sound less German.
Right.
An early
Grad comes from Gorod, that's the Russian word for city, so it's basically Peter's city.
Russian advance into East Prussia ended with heavy defeats at Tannenberg and the Masurian Lakes. There was greater success against Austria-Hungary, but that too came at a high price. Russian losses forced the army to make a general retreat in 1915. In 1916, Russia's Brusilov Offensive against Austro-Hungarian forces was one of the most successful Allied attacks of the war.
Also one of the most deadly attacks in human history. Huge casualties from the Brusilov Offensive. Amazing feat, though. He was supposed to be a distraction because over in the west, you have Verdun, you have the Battle of the Somme going on. Germany is about to capture Paris. They beg Russia to help distract Germany to bring some forces this way. Russia's original plan was that these guys were going to do a bulk of that and push in Germany. Brusilov, Alexei, I believe it is, Brusilov is sent down to the south to hit the Austro-Hungarian Empire as kind of a distraction to help pull some of the German troops down this way. He does more than distract. He pushes deep into the Austro-Hungarian Empire. He has them reeling. If he had had support, he probably could have knocked them out of the war right then. Unfortunately, because he was supposed to be a distraction, he did not have support. But what a distraction he was. As a result of that offensive, Germany is forced to send more troops to the east, which allows the Allies to recover from this near disaster near Paris.
But losses were so heavy that the Russian army was unable to launch any more major operations. In Petrograd, Rasputin, whose alleged influence over the Tsar's family was despised by certain Russian aristocrats, was murdered, possibly with the help of British agents.
Rasputin's a fascinating character. I've been to the palace where he was first attacked. According to lore, he was kind of murdered like multiple times. He was poisoned, and then shot, stabbed, and then he finally died of drowning when he thrown off a bridge. I've been to that was the Krestovsky Bridge to Krestovsky Island, Ostrov. I've been there as well. In fact, the hotel we stayed in when we were in St. Petersburg was on that island. Yeah.
The war put intolerable strains on Russia.
It did.
At the front, losses were enormous, while in the cities, economic mismanagement led to rising prices and food shortages.
Yeah, and I think we tend to forget about this side of it. When we're talking about the Russian Revolution, there's a lot of focus on the Bolsheviks and the communists coming in and leading a revolution. But at the heart of it, there's really two things going on here. You've got the young men being brutally killed over on the front, the Western front as far as the Russians are concerned, the Eastern front of the theater. But to the west, the Russians are dying in high numbers. Back home, the people are starving. There's bread shortages. Prior to the outbreak of the revolution, you'll find small localized uprisings, bread riots, in some of the villages throughout, especially southern Russia. You see like Cossack forces being hired to come in and deal with these rioters in some of these villages. And in at least one case that I'm aware of, the Cossacks end up turning and supporting the rioters. If you read the letters of officers that are fighting on the Eastern Front for Russia, a lot of them are expressing concerns in their letters that their wives and children back home are literally starving because there's not enough food, because there's no men to do the farming and the food production, because so many of them are being sent west to the meat grinder. So there's shortages of food, there's shortages of everything. So a lot of these officers are starting to worry about their wives, their kids, their families. So yeah, you can take out the Bolsheviks, you can take out Rasputin. Those both contribute to this revolution. But I think all of this, the food shortages in particular, are really at the heart of it. That's my personal opinion. If you read some of the letters, even some journal and diary entries by foreign observers. For example, there's an American in Moscow prior to the outbreak of the February Revolution who writes that Russia is on the brink of revolution and it will be a revolution caused by the want of bread. You see this throughout this period. The food shortages are a big part of the problem.
In Petrograd, the workers' frustration led to strikes and demonstrations. Troops, ordered to disperse the crowds, refused and joined the protesters instead.
Yep. Like I said, that was happening earlier in the bread riots in the south, with the Cossacks turning against the local rulers. who were wanting to have these riots suppressed.
The government had lost control of the capital.
Yep.
On board the imperial train at Pskov, senior politicians and generals told the emperor he must abdicate, or Russia would descend into anarchy and lose the war. Nicholas accepted their advice and renounced the throne in favor of his brother, Grand Duke Michael, who effectively declined the offer.
Yeah, he said, okay, no, I don't think so. Smart man.
400 years of Romanov rule
Did he just say 400, but he wrote 300? It's about 300.
were at an end. Russia was now a republic.
Yep.
A provisional government took power, but could not halt Russia's slide into economic and military chaos.
Yeah, so this is the February Revolution. It's distinctly separate from the later October Revolution. That's where you have Lenin and the Bolshevik taking over. In fact, in the February Revolution, according to Trotsky at least, some factions of the Bolsheviks were actually siding against the revolution in support of the monarchy because they weren't ready yet for their revolution, where they wanted to bring in communism. So, at least, again, according to Trotsky, some of the Bolsheviks were siding with the monarchy in February.
Workers, soldiers, and peasants elected their own councils, known as Soviets.
Yep. Yeah, and that's where the term Soviet comes from. It's kind of almost like a labor union, and Trotsky is a moving force behind this.
The Petrograd Soviet was so powerful, it was effectively a rival government, especially as discontent with the Provisional government continued to grow. The Bolsheviks, under Vladimir Lenin, attracted growing support with their radical proposals for an immediate end to the war, the redistribution of land, and transfer of power to the Soviets.
Yep.
In October, they launched a coup, masterminded by Leon Trotsky. Bolshevik Red Guards stormed the Winter Palace, where the Provisional government met, and arrested its members. Lenin and the Bolsheviks were now in charge. Russia had been thrown upon a bold and dangerous course. Under a Marxist-inspired revolutionary party, it would now seek to create the world's first communist state.
No. Communism, by definition, is a stateless society. You cannot have a communist state, by definition. Communism is a stateless society. So, yeah, we use the word communist for what the Russian government is, but it's really not. It's an extreme form of socialism, but it's an autocracy. It is a rule by a single individual primarily. Yes, you have support, but is anyone going to pretend that Lenin's not in charge here or Stalin's not in charge after Lenin? No, especially with Stalin. You make that claim, you're dead. Not a communist state, because like I said, communist is a stateless society. It's a far-left socialist state.
But first, it would have to survive the chaos and slaughter of one of history's bloodiest civil wars.
Yeah. All right, so I guess that's where we're ending it, is with the, well, it did say through the Russian Revolution. The revolution is over. Now we're going into civil war. Got the whites versus the reds primarily, but there's other factions. Other countries get involved. The United States and I believe around 10,000 soldiers. When World War I ends, they ship 10,000 soldiers over to participate in the Russian civil wars. Other countries do likewise. That's not going to help much with the post-revolution and post-Civil War period relationships between all these countries as a result, because Russia had been an ally, but now you've got these foreign powers coming in and trying to dictate the direction Russia goes, which is not going to make them very many friends. So yeah, great series, well done, mostly broad strokes, but to do all of Russian history in this period, this is about 1,000 years that they're talking about here, would have taken a much, much longer series than this. So great job. I hope I was able to add some context, additional information to some of the parts that I know better than some of the others. Thank you for joining me on this journey, and hope to see you in whatever we do next. Until then, for the final time, I'm going to say paka paka. Bye-bye.